All right, you guys. So I would like to introduce Corey. Corey is from Billings. He's a former Navy Academy grad, which is pretty impressive. He ran for governor, as you well know. He came in number 2. And so, Corey, if you'd like to say a few words, we appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, and good to be back. I think I've been here. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Welcome. Good. You made it. I think I've been here, I don't know, I can't remember, 3 or 4 times over the last dozen years. So it's always good to be back. And the candidates we've all been up on the High Line. So there's 4 of us actively engaged in the race. And so, as you all know, we migrate from Lincoln-Reagan dinner to Lincoln-Reagan dinner. And we're currently, our nomadic trails have brought us across the High Line. And in fact, we had 3 Lincoln-Reagan dinners in 24 hours, just 2 days ago. And of course, they're not next door to each other, so it's amazing the skills that you have to develop as a candidate to do this. It's a little like the Spartan races. I mean, you have to have great driving skills, all-weather vehicles. In the governor's race, I hit 2 deer. Going from one to the next, and it was turned into kind of a funny story. I ended up dressed like this in the middle of the night. It was as cold as it is today, so I was running into Cascade because of my vehicle, and got picked up by somebody who ended up being a very dear friend and a supporter of one of the opponents, Jim O'Hara, in the governor's race. And so when I went up to the Lincoln-Reagan dinner and I sit down at my table, here's this couple, and I was so embarrassed because I just tried to hide this whole thing, and finally I got to talk about this. So I told Fort Benton the whole story because I knew that they'd be talking about it anyway. So anyway, when you're a Montana candidate for office, you've got to be multifaceted. So this is nothing. I drove down from Great Falls, and I swear the left side of my face feels sunburned. But it was 12 below 0. Yeah. In Washington, D.C.
But all those poor people in Rhode Island.
Yeah, in Rhode Island, they would call this a thermal vortex.
And they only have to drive in it for 10 minutes to get.
In Montana, we call it Tuesday. So I'll have one campaign rule as I travel around Montana, and that is anybody who voted for Barack Obama twice is too foolish to argue with him. But everybody else, I need your support. I need their support to win this very important race. I am Corey Stapleton. I grew up in Great Falls, up the road there, and joined the Navy out of high school. I'm a Great Falls High School graduate of 1986. Earned a nomination to the United States Naval Academy, where I earned an engineering degree, later a master's degree, and was commissioned as a United States naval officer. And I drove aircraft carriers and Aegis cruisers for a living before I moved back to Montana, where I've been a small businessman for 17 years and former state senate minority leader from Billings. I married my high school sweetheart, Terry. Terry and I have 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls, ages 19, 15, 13, and 11. And Terry and I, like I said, we started dating at Great Falls High School when we were 16. That was 30 years ago. 30 years ago, you remember that? The greatest threat to the United States 30 years ago was the Soviet Union. Remember that? Communism. Gorbachev, Reagan, the movie Top Gun. In fact, my class at the Naval Academy was called the Top Gun class because so many of us, we were the largest class in history. So many of us applied to Annapolis after that blockbuster movie came out in the mid-'80s with Tom Cruise. But of course, the Soviets aren't the problem. They're not the threat anymore, are they? Threat are.
This week.
Maybe because of the Olympics.
No, the Ukraine.
Because of the Ukraine. The Soviet Union, but this is Russia. The threat never really goes away. It just changes from Russia to now China, right? I believe the greatest threat to America's national security is our $17 trillion in debt. I'm running for Congress because I believe our debt to countries like China threaten our economy, threaten our national security, while Congress and President Barack Obama continue to just rack up billions of dollars in debt to China. They use that money to strengthen their economy and their military. As a Navy veteran, I swore an oath to protect our country, and I'm running for Congress to restore American greatness. But the Democrats don't get it. The Democrats are voting to increase our national debt. The Republicans are voting to stop it. The Democrats are voting to destroy our healthcare system with Obamacare. Republicans are trying to stop it. The Democrats are destroying millions of jobs, 2 million of jobs on Obamacare alone. Millions of jobs could be created in the natural resource industry. Republicans are voting to create jobs, to enhance the private sector, to lower regulations, and get us out of this recession. Democrats continually vote to remove our freedoms, to undermine our sovereignty as a republic so that we become just one big global world order, right? Republicans are voting to stop it. In fact, the only thing that stands between us where we are now and an economic and moral collapse of historic proportions is a Republican-held U.S. House of Congress. That's all that stands between us, President Barack Obama and Harry Reid. I understand the threat. I'm the proven conservative leader who can stop it. There's some other good people running. We're all state senators. But you know what Republican state senators do once we're elected? A couple of them did during my time. We all get together and we choose a leader. And the reason why I was chosen the leader was because of my integrity, my courage. I never confused our friends with our opponents. And while I was willing to compromise on policy, I never would compromise on our conservative shared values. I stood up to Brian Schweitzer and the liberals in Helena. I'll stand up to Barack Obama and the liberals in Washington, D.C. But I can't do it alone. We need people across the state to unify the fiscal conservatives, the social conservatives, the constitutional conservatives, the libertarians, all of the people who like to be identified in the modern era, not as Republican, somehow fell out of vogue sometime in the last decade. When I first ran for the state senate 14 years ago, we were Republicans. That was what you were. You didn't describe yourself differently or sneer at somebody else. If you had an issue with a moderate and you were conservative, you figured it out, you worked it out, you kept it contained. You didn't say, I'm a conservative and not a Republican. You didn't say, I'm with the Liberty Caucus. Or, I'm Tea Party, I'm not a Republican. We didn't say any of that. It isn't that those people didn't exist. This isn't that we recognize that in the system that exists today, there are two parties in Washington, D.C. And one is trying to increase the debt, and one is trying to move, and one is destroying jobs, and one is trying to create it, and one is trying to turn us into one with the rest of the globe, and one is trying to retain our sovereignty and our constitutional form of government. And you got to pick sides. And I get that, and that's why I was a Republican leader from essentially the day that I was elected into the state senate back in 2000. In 2001, literally, I had a battlefield promotion into the whip position. Dale Berry passed away of a blood clot. He was our majority whip. Anybody remember Dale Berry? Wonderful man, booming voice. He was my seatmate. It was kind of a strange session now that I think of it. I had Dale Berry on the right, who was this big, tall, booming guy from the Valley. And he was the majority whip. And he's in the Montana Hall of Fame for coaching. I didn't know that, so it was before my time, even as a kid, basketball coach. And to the left of me, literally, figuratively, was John Bullen. And it was the damnedest session. Dale and I pushed green, John pushed red. John pushed green, Bush red. This whole thing, you know, those of you guys who know the vote, you don't have two choices. But we did have some people that after they became Republican state senators, they became Democrats. And on that note, I paid a price. I remember, you know, you're not, when you're the minority leader, you're not supposed to be liked by the other side. Now, I think if you ask the people that I stood across the aisle from John Tester to Mike Cooney to Carol Williams, they would tell you that they respected me, that we were friendly. We actually got along very well. We didn't vote the same, but we respected each other. But if you do your job as the minority leader, you will take some heat. You have guys like this following you around, capturing what you say. You have people in the media being tools for the Democratic Party.
Not me.
And I remember taking Sam Kitzenberg to task. I remember taking John Bollinger to task. Because what we were saying in the caucus was, these guys are not Republicans. You know? It took us 10 years to recognize that they formally did switch parties, but the truth is, when you look at those of us who are running for office, for this very important position, only one congressional seat. So you got to be a whole lot of things. You really can't have a lot of weakness. You can't be someone who sits back in the caucus and doesn't want to engage and doesn't want to be seen in the media. Because guess what? These guys aren't going to let that happen. From day one on the job, you're under attack. Okay? From day one on the job, you have to be a leader of a state of 1 million people, the 4th largest state. They are so different in eastern Montana from western northwest center that you would be amazed sometimes what it means to those different areas to be Republican. But yet you have to represent them. If you don't have the skill to do that, to articulate, communicate through the media, to fight, to play offense, to do defense, if you can't do that, then I don't think you're going to be as effective as Montana deserves. We only have one representative, and so when you look at the 4 of us running, I think it's instructive. I'm not saying that the state legislature is the minor leagues and the federal legislature is the major leagues, but there are some comparisons. If you were quiet and sat back and didn't do wrinkles in the state legislature, you're probably going to be that way at the federal. If you voted with the Democrats in Helena, you're going to vote with the Democrats in Washington, D.C. And if you were a leader and someone who did things for the right reasons, then you're likely going to be set up to do that same sort of thing in Washington. So I'm hopeful that we can earn as a party a couple things that seem to elude us in the past couple cycles, and that is, one, expand our strike zone to include people who don't agree with us 100% of the time, but maybe just 90% of the time. We don't need third parties and libertarians and independents finding good reasons to not vote for Republican candidates. We have the wind at our back. The president is doubling down on his landmark legislation, for better or for worse. President Obama got what he wanted, and that will be his legacy. And as we speak, an unraveling of the computer system, which is Obamacare, is going to continue to be a problem. So let's keep it together. Let's support the candidates, the Republican candidates for the legislature, for the statewide. And I think that this is an incredible opportunity for us to pick up both federal races. When did that happen last time? What an exciting time. I can tell you this, there's a lot of energy out on the trail, and we're going to get it done. So I'll seal that off and let everybody grab their food. And
Oh, that's what it was.
if you've got questions or whatnot, I'll just shoot away, and I'd love to answer them. I'd love your support. It's great to be back in our state capital.
Super, Sam.
let it move through here. Sure. Anybody have any questions for Corey?
We'll let him eat, then we can.
Go ahead. No, I'm fine. I'm just got soup, so.
Corey, can you articulate how your position, for example, on energy development might differ from some of the other candidates running for this, and how that, and because I think that's one of the most important messages that our congressmen would like to take back to the.
Sure. The question is around energy development. What I have observed, and this is not to slight Drew Turiana, but he's not been traveling with the others, so let's just say there's 4 people running, okay? The 4 people who are actively engaged, I don't know that there's a whole lot of daylight between the way that we would vote or have voted. That being said, one of them did get an environmentalist award when they were in the legislature, but for the most part, most would get up and say they support coal, oil, natural gas. So let's just say there's a wash there. My particular background was I was the lead sponsor of the Otter Creek coal legislation more than a decade ago. Judy Martz, our governor's most proudest legislation, I was the sponsor. I carried her legislation, and she's a dear friend. She's supporting me in this race also. I keep in touch with her. She's down south now. She gets these warm winters. She's still the Spitfire that she always was. But I carried legislation more than a decade ago that was to develop our Otter Creek coal. As you probably know of that legislation, so we don't need to go into it. But the significance was that was a way to pay for our school system. As a way that this land, which is partially owned by the government, partially owned by the private sector, etc. You can't just let the private sector do it because it's checkerboarded. It has to be a partnership. Interestingly enough, there are places in the state that are very uncomfortable. Some of the very conservative places in the state, they're very uncomfortable when you mention public-private partnerships. Like it's a conspiracy. But when you want to take them up into an airplane and show them the checkerboard of land ownership between government, private sector, government, private sector, and recognize if you're going to mine that coal, you have to do it together. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with letting the government front the cost for some of the development, the core sampling, dealing with the Native American tribes that might be impacted, etc. So I have an experience in doing all this, and I believe in doing all this, and I think it's good for our state. One of the commonalities that we found with the Democrats in the Schweitzer administration was that he supported us on that. And so Brian Schweitzer was in general supportive of developing the Otter Creek coal. He certainly took the money. I don't know, maybe somebody in here can tell me whether or not Arch Coal is ever going to get moved. Because all I know is I carried the legislation. That fight had been going on for a long, long time. I was term limited out. The coal still hasn't moved. So go figure that. So to answer your shortly, just to reiterate, I think all the Republicans support it. Who has the courage to carry that legislation? And I'm not talking signing on as co-sponsors. Those of you who would know me in my legislative years, I like to take on the big issues. I took on the Department of Revenue. Was willing to be a one-term state senator over a faulty computer system that was being covered up. And when I took on, it was called Points, was the name of the computer system. I was an army of one. I was taking on my own party. I was taking on my own governor, trying to do so in a respectful way that wasn't going to hurt them politically, but at the same time insist on this $20 million debacle to be fixed. It took 2.5 years, but when it finally got done, it passed the Senate with a 50-0 vote. When I began, almost nobody supported it. When I ended, virtually everyone did. And so that's a blueprint for how I'd like to be your congressman. If there's an important, tough issue out there, that's where I like to go. I don't avoid the difficult things. That's why I run. That's why I ran. That's why I served 11 years in the United States Navy. It's why when I could have taken shore duty, I didn't. I took ships. I went overseas. My favorite life saying is a ship in the harbor is safe. But that's not what ships are for.
Anybody else have a question?
Yeah.
Corey, as a first-term member of the Congress, there's a lot of people around and all kinds of people talking, suggesting, and whatever. Do you have a major issue that you would like to see enacted in your first term in the U.S. Congress?
Great question. You're asking as if you were king for a day and could actually get your way as a freshman.
Well, if you're getting
Or
today,
Obama for a day.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great question. It's somewhat hypothetical because I do realize that your entire first term, if you can even find your way around and people give you respect. I'll tell you this much, some of the things I'm very interested in the natural resources I would love to serve on a committee like that. My background is a financial advisor. For 17 years I've been a top financial advisor in the Northwest. I would love to serve in areas of the financial services, and that was optional. And then in the international affairs, having been someone that travels in the different areas of the world, I understand. But I think to get back to what I said earlier, because I like to go where the most important things are happening, I think the single greatest threat to America's security right now is our debt. And so I would love to be part of the solution that instead of everybody justifying why we have to go from 17 to 19 million, or trillion, sorry, what Reagan used to say, billion here, billion there, starts to add up. Instead of everybody just marching along that like it's self-evident or truth, to go the other way. So, for example, by the end of the last 2 years of Obama's presidency, I would like to get to 15 trillion debt and do what needs to be done comprehensively to get there. So it's one of those strange votes because everybody, as I campaign across the state, everybody, not everybody, 2/3 of the people will routinely say, absolutely, we don't need to increase the debt one more penny. But then when it comes, that's the big picture argument. But then when the media forces the vote, Gary Reed forces the vote, Barack Obama steps back and says, don't you love his line? This is the Texas two-step that happens in Washington, D.C. that gets us in trouble. President Barack Obama sits back, crosses his arms and said, I am not going to negotiate with the Congress that refuses to pay for the expenses it's already incurred. So, in other words, he absolves himself of owning the issue of the debt, but he doesn't bring forward how many years did he go without bringing forward a budget? So through continuing resolutions or whatever, and of course everybody, this is the town of Helena, you guys know how this works, everything has statutory increases anyway. So for a president to step back and void himself of leadership or responsibility of the debt tells me what his legacy should say is exactly that. Is it for 8 years he stood back and facilitated this debacle called Obamacare happen, and then he didn't have the courage to lead us out of the problems that it created. And it's created enormous problems. If they went back now, the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, and scored is the term they use, but if they had to give a 10-year analysis of what the true cost of what Obamacare is, it wouldn't even be close to what they tricked it to be to make it legal to pass. Because they exempted it out, because of adverse selection, and in reality all it was ever going to be was a transfer tax to the youngest, healthiest people in America, as if they need any more disenfranchisement, right? I mean, they're already now living at home until what age?
42.
This administration has declared war on the youngest, most productive, emerging kids, young adults in our history. Instead of giving them the ability to get college degrees easily and buy homes and get married in their mid-20s, good luck with that. What we're doing is saddling with $50-some thousand of debt per person, that's their share of the federal debt. And we're making it almost impossible for them without parental help or dependence on some or numerous government organizations to ever get into sort of the American dream before their midlife. That's just a disgrace to the American life.
So, Obamacare, is it going to be easy to repeal when we do get a majority in Washington DC?
Well, there's two parts to it. The answer is no. The problem is that the president will veto likely anything that comes on his desk that takes away his signature legislation. I think we have to assume that. Not necessarily true, but overriding a veto is nearly impossible. So living in the world of the practicality, the most important race in Montana this year is not mine. It's the race for the Senate. This is the second most important race. And as I said before, because the Republican House is the only thing standing between the Democratic Senate and the Democratic President, rolling this thing even further and further, At what point does the critical mass of debt become suffocating to the ways that the countries of Europe we've seen that happen? So many people now think it's a birthright that the United States, well, that will never happen to us. Oh my goodness, what a tragedy of history. So I think my hope would be that we could get some of the Blue Dog Democrats to agree that let's keep some of the things that make sense that everybody could agree. We could have agreed on this 5 years ago, right? Pre-existing conditions. Let's keep that. Let's work with that. But let's get back to the private sector solutions for Obamacare. We've got to get rid of, repeal the direction where we're going. The concern of whether or not, what's the medical term, metastasize? It's been in law for so long now that it's got its tentacles throughout government and be very difficult. But we need to do it because it's the right thing to do. We need to go back and keep people covered in pre-existing conditions were already outlawed 20, 30 years ago, right? In group policies. All we're talking about is individual policies. The Republicans on Obama, for people who say there's no difference, one of the guys likes to say, well, both the parties are the problem. I'm like, well, on Obamacare, the Republicans were right, and the Democrats lied. We were right. Absolutely, universally, every single Republican in Congress voted against that. We knew it was wrong. And the things that they did, the lies that they told to get it put into law and now kept into law should be the reason why we take back the Senate in 2014. And to your bigger question, a new president in 2016 who then we can complete the circle and repeal the worst aspects that this president will never let.
There's something like 75% of the bridges in the U.S. are substandard. Our infrastructure is slowly deteriorating. In the past, feds have really kicked up, but in the last 6-7 years, we've seen a decline in infrastructure spending. What's your position on infrastructure spending? And Montana's traditionally done very well. The transportation bill, and those kind of things. What's your opinion on those?
I'm a son of an architect. Okay, I grew up with a dad. Everywhere we drove in the streets, every building wherever. I thought everybody did that. You do it as a candidate, people want to. I've always understood that you build things and then it's far cheaper to keep them maintained than it is to build new ones, right? We need to continue to build our infrastructure. We need to continue to make it smart. We live in such an extraordinary time. How much longer will it be before we don't ever have outlets or plugins? The world that the world is so quickly changing that it makes a lot of sense. Not just the bricks and mortar stuff, but the energy grids, all of this. I joined the Navy to be a nuclear engineer. The most fascinating thing to me in the world at age 18 years old was trying to understand the primary and secondary coolant system surrounding fission, and energy, and this crazy, crazy thing that could create such incredible energy that an aircraft carrier could get fuel. Imagine how much energy it takes to move an aircraft carrier, 5,000 people through the water, for 1 million miles before it had to be refueled. It just blew me away. So I love technology. I love the idea that we stay ahead of the curve. And because I believe in the sovereignty of America and that we should not be trying to have a race to the bottom with the rest of the countries. This is what happens. This is what happens with, this. Hey, there was bipartisan support to send mass rockets to China. I get that. That's a great vote.
Is there someplace farther away?
Did we get a round trip ticket?
Yeah. The partisanship begins on whether it should be a round trip ticket or a one way. No, the difficulty of where this pursuit of just, free trade with China, let's put it in context. We should not be pursuing free trade, we should be pursuing near equal trade. If it's good for our country, then that's good for our country. But we're right now, for every 5 things we send to them, they're sending us 35 things back. That's the difference. A $350 billion trade deficit, whatever that number is. It's 5 going there and 35 coming back. If it's easier to put your arms around that. That's not free trade. That's taking down our quality of life and bringing up what's going to be the next superpower if we stay on the course that we are. This is a nation, an empire throughout history, which is used to being the greatest in the world. I mean, their history goes back thousands of years. They rise and fall with the seasons. We need to recognize that. We're just a country that's been around a couple 100,000 years. But all the great countries come and go. We replaced Britain, they replaced France, and you had Spain, and you had Greece, and ancient Rome. We've got to learn from history, and the beauty of the American Constitution is such that they thought about this. Our founding fathers struggled with this. How do we make America great? Not for a now or 100 years, but forever with this document. And that's why the importance of the document. We have to follow the document. Because the document is what's going to save us through these good presidencies and bad presidencies and world wars and economic meltdowns and asteroid hitting the earth and losing half the planet. Whatever happens, you would like to think that the Constitution is there and that if we will, as Benjamin Franklin said, we've given you a republic if you can keep it. If you can keep it. So that's why I'm running for office. We got to keep it. The problem is we don't have a critical mass of people now who care. Romney was looking at like a deer in the headlights again, right? We may have lost a critical mass of people in America who either know or care why a constitutional republic necessarily means we care about the 300 million people who live here before the 7 billion in the rest of the world. And it isn't that we're not compassionate. We're overly compassionate. We're the most compassionate nation in the history of the world. We give our enemies money. People that try to kill us and blow us up, we have these arrangements. It's maddening. But we have no obligation to make China the next superpower of the world. That's our position, and we should be in a place where, as Montanans, we understand the saying. Strong fences make good neighbors. Let's keep a strong fence with them. We don't have to be warriors. We don't have to be, but they're more like opponents than they are friends. I mean, they do things in their country that are very different from us, and it's not just religion, and it's just not that they selectively, abort their girls so they have 20 million more men than women. I mean, there's such a strange and different place in a communist country like that than there is with us. What I think we ought to do is pursue policies where we do trade with our natural allies, and we have free trade agreements with people that we consider allies and friends. And with the rest of the world, we keep strong fences. And I think that's how we stay out of these crazy wars that every 50 or 80 years the world gets into. When in 1930, the same people who were arguing that we should have free trade with these countries were the same ones saying we should be selling our scrap metal to Germany and Japan in the 1930s. And somebody's gotta take a look and go, look, guys, let's come back to our boys at Normandy Beach, you know? So, I think that we've got such an opportunity for leadership, and even a freshman congressman who has the passion and the ideas that we can make this country better, I don't really believe that it takes a whole lot of time. Over the last couple of years, I was pretty encouraged. Let me give you a few names of Republicans, courageous Republicans who are younger than I am, who made a difference. Scott Walker, Paul Ryan, Marco Rubio. These guys are younger than I am. You know, I think of myself as, you know, pretty young. But the point is, it's time for new blood, fresh ideas in the party. It's time for us to challenge that Barack Obama and that conglomerate thought that everybody in America needs to be, you know, taken care of. And Obama's going to take care of you. You know. So I think we can do it, and I think we can make a big difference. I encourage new leadership change in Washington, D.C. I think that, you know, a lot of turnover would be good. So I don't think that primaries necessarily are bad for Republicans, in the sense that, you know, maybe we're getting some, you know, after someone's been there for 30, 40 years, they pretty much reached their potential. Let's get some new people there, get some new people that represent different ideas inside the party, staying true to our conservative principles, but finding new solutions and policy.
Any last comments? We're getting quite on our time here, so 10 minutes to go. Anything last you want to say? Hand out envelopes.
Got some envelopes, got some cards, use Twitter or Facebook or any of that. We'd love your support. The polling is good. We're leading the field. We're up on John Lewis more than any other Republican. We're in a good spot. But you know, this is the Republican Party, and we have circular firing squads, and we know how to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory better than anybody. So I appreciate your support, and tell your friends, and bring it all together. I have a feeling that Steve Daines is going to emerge out of the primary in his race. I think that we're in a great position to win both of these races, and for all the right reasons. You know, he asked if I wanted to not have the Democratic track record, and I'm like, you know what? No, we can win this race in the wide open. And the truth is, when we remember that everybody in Montana is pretty much a fiscal conservative, they don't like what's going on in Washington, D.C. Barack Obama's approval rating here, I think, is about 38%. Disapproval rate's 56%. There's not a whole lot of ways that the Democrats are going to be able to spin that. Yeah, they'll be able to attack us, they'll be able to divide us, they'll be able to do some of that. But for the most part, we've paid the price in the last couple of years, and now it's our turn. 2014 is our turn. So let's stick together, let's get her done. We'll run hard through the finish line. We got a lot of work left to do. We've got a lot of travel, thousands of miles, and lots of people to meet and see. But my experience both is finishing second in the governor's race and in my 8 years in the state senate, former naval officer and businessman. I think I'm ready, and I'd like to be your congressman. So thanks for coming and being such a great audience today.